Okay. Do you see the slides on the screen, students?
Yes, ma'am,
Yes,
it is
ma'am.
visible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the confirmation. So today we have with us is Samina. She is an upper level academic advisor in the College of Natural Sciences at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, with an experience in academic advising, teaching, student success, mentorship, and research. She holds an MS in plant and soil sciences and BS in sustainable food and farming from UMass, Amherst. Her student centered experience includes serving as an instructor of a record of the UMass Transfer Success Seminar, facilitating academic skill workshop for more than 250 students and supporting first generation low income and student with disability through the federally funded TRIO Student Support Services program. She is passionate about creating inclusive learning environment and helping students develop the skills, confidence, and resources that they need to succeed throughout their academic journey. Please welcome Miss Samina Jemain. She is going to lead this session today for week 5, and she's going to share her real time research and experience with you all. Please welcome her. Thank you, Samina, for spending the time with us and giving your valuable information about, climate smart agriculture and sustainability.
Thank you, Dr. Sanobar, for the introduction. Assalamu alaikum and hello, everyone. I'm excited to join you all this week for session 5 on climate smart agriculture and sustainability. This session will probably go for about 50 minutes, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at the end of the presentation. But if there's something you'd like to discuss further during the presentation, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. I'm happy to answer any questions. With further ado, I will make this presentation a bit bigger so you can see it and then get started. So to give you kind of a brief overview of what topics I'm going to cover today, we'll start with the 1960s Green Revolution because this pretty much set the stone for how we grow food today and forever changed the way in which we produce food, not only on a country by country basis, but also globally with importing and exporting food. Then we'll shift over and talk a little bit about what challenges are faced right now in the agricultural sector. And then after that, we'll talk a bit about what climate smart agriculture is, and then touch on sustainable agriculture alongside a case study. So if you haven't heard of the Green Revolution before, it was a period of time from, and it's kind of debated, but around 1943 to 1970. And it really was a period of time that forever changed the way we grow food to this day. It was a time period that introduced new technologies in agriculture with the goal of boosting crop production and the yield outputs from crops through a series of diversified measures. Some key points here with the Green Revolution was the adoption of high-yielding crop varieties, abbreviated as HYV. And in particular, we're talking about wheat, corn, and rice, so staple crops. It also had one of the goals was to develop shorter crop varieties, so versus taller ones that were more responsive to synthetic fertilizers, and synthetic being those derived kind of from nitrogen imports. After World War II, there was a lot of excess of nitrogen available, and so that was used then in the agricultural sector. Another key point here was improved irrigation systems because this was a limiting factor. Before the Green Revolution, this was a limited factor of how much crops farmers could grow due to water supply. And this was a topic, the Green Revolution, that I was really interested in when I was an undergraduate student. I did a thesis looking at different case studies from India, Pakistan, and one country in Africa, a small country called Zambia, to see how these Green Revolution technologies played out. Was it a benefit to the countries? Was it did it negatively shape agriculture? And it was kind of both sides in these countries. In India, for example, some of the positives from the Green Revolution that it shifted the country from importing grades to becoming more self-sufficient by producing short-term yield increases. So during this period, because of these high-yielding varieties, farmers were able to grow more crops. And so yield increased, they were able to grow two crops of the same crop in a single season. So let's say maybe they were able to plant two crops of wheat rather than just one. And so this altogether led to the local population able to consume a more variety of diet, so they were able to get more nutrition. On the flip side, some of the negative aspects of the Green Revolution in India were the shift to global imports for wheat and rice. The new technologies such as fertilizers and pesticides in these high-yielding varieties required farmers to purchase them from these larger companies. And so that was a shift to global imports. It also led to seed patenting. So in contrast to where farmers are able to save seeds year after year, farmers could not do that with these high yielding variety crops. They had to buy them from these large companies. Today, you can kind of think of them like Monsanto is one of the larger ones. And so this also led to the privatization and consolidation of suppliers in the agricultural sector. And nowadays, we see maybe only 5 companies globally that own seeds, that own pesticides and fertilizers that are distributed on a global scale. And so this ultimately led to the adaptation of monocultures in farms, and we see those negative impacts today with soil salinization and other soil fertility problems because you're just growing the same one crop year after year. And to kind of move on and also talk a little, get some visual aspects of the Green Revolution. So this is a really nice chart that I found. If you know the author, Vandana Shiva, she writes a lot of about the agricultural sector in India, but also on a global scale and some of the problems that we're seeing with modern day agriculture. So on the left side of this image, you can kind of see the inputs that were required for the new green revolution. So things like fertilizers, pesticides, dams, and herbicides, alongside those highly responsive varieties of seeds, and then the ecological impacts that we're seeing. This was another chart that I found, and this basically depicts the changes in area cultivated for traditional and those high-yielding variety crops in India from 1961 to 2018. And so here you can kind of see where the blue bars are, the difference. You can see that we're cultivating larger numbers of wheat, soybeans, and these other staple crops. And more traditional crops that we've previously seen, like jute or millet and sorghum, the number and yields of those crops are decreasing. So we're focusing more on these high yielding crops that are more responsive to the Green Revolution inputs. And now to talk about some of the global challenges we're seeing in the agriculture sector and what some of those drivers are. I found this chart online and I think it's really useful because it kind of depicts what the main driver is, which is greenhouse gas emissions. So that's right there in the center, and land use change. Land use change is basically the process by which humans are transforming the natural landscape. So things maybe like housing development or making shopping malls, those are all contributing to land use change. And so the ring kind of surrounding the greenhouse emissions are the drivers that we're seeing in terms of the climate. So things maybe like the melting of the ice caps, sea levels rising, more extreme weather patterns. Those are all things we're seeing right now in the climate that have an impact in agriculture and everything else around the world. And then on the outer ring of the circle, those are the direct impacts we're seeing in terms of agriculture and food security. So things maybe like habitable region of pests expand. So as the weather warms, pests are moving upwards. Like for example, in the U.S., pests that are currently in Florida, which is a southern state, are moving up maybe towards South Carolina. So farmers are seeing different pests, new pests they haven't seen before on their land. And now there's a new challenge of how are they going to deal with those pests that have never been there before. And then we're also seeing things like risk to water supplies, flooding, and a general loss of biodiversity. And then talking a bit about now global challenges in particular to pesticides, because that was one of the main things from the Green Revolution, and also one um, thing that is always in the news is, are pesticides safe? Are they being used effectively? And so this is just from one study I had found, but the use of pesticides and fertilizers in ag. So this map is depicting the projected impact of climate change on agricultural yields. So we can see here that climate change is not impacting all countries equally. That climate change is not impacting all countries equally. So we can see the countries that are most impacted are ones that are in the global south. In particular, countries like South America, Africa, and South Asia, and the southern part of the United States are seeing the effects of climate change a lot more. This chart here is a bit older, but I wanted to show it because it shows how agriculture is the largest sector that uses water. So you can see that on the green dotted line compared to things like maybe municipal and the industries. The agriculture is the largest sector of water use. Here you can see that how much water is required to produce 1 kilogram of some common food items. And you can see here compared to maybe lettuce or apple, which use a lot less, chocolate, coffee, and beef consume a significantly larger amount of water in terms of production. And so um, just thinking about how maybe in terms of climate change, what crops can we grow that might require less water if water is a limiting factor for different regions. And now to kind of shift over and talk a bit about climate smart agriculture. So climate smart agriculture is sometimes abbreviated as CSA on websites or in papers, but it's an approach to help guide actions to transform and reorient agricultural systems so that we can more effectively and sustainably support food development and food security under a changing climate. And the key word there is climate. Um, and it also includes cover not just farming, but it includes cover crop and livestock production, fisheries, so growing maybe like aquaculture or growing fish, as well as forest management. So that includes maybe things like if you're growing food in a forest, or if you're just growing maybe raising trees for timber production. So that's also all included under climate smart agriculture. And one important thing to note here is that climate smart agriculture is not a new form of production or farming practices. It's really just meant for looking at agriculture as we do it already right now, and how can we maybe change the varieties we grow if warming temperatures are impacting the crop varieties we grow, maybe changing those varieties to ones that are more adaptable to climate change. And with climate smart agriculture, it's looking to tackle three kind of separate goals. And so the first there is productivity. So how can we increase food security by also increasing the productivity of the food we grow and farmer income? How can we adapt to strengthen farmers' capacity to adapt to climate change itself? And then lastly, this is a big one in terms of climate smart agriculture and what differentiates it from other forms of agriculture is that it's really looking also to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions compared to what we expect those trends to be on a global scale. These are, if you've seen these maybe before, but these are the UN Sustainable Development Goals that are kind of what they have projected for 2030. And so with climate smart agriculture, it doesn't touch on all 17 of these, but it's touching on the one circled there in red. So it's looking to reduce poverty. Climate smart agriculture is trying to reduce hunger. It's looking to responsibly produce food and have it produced, consumed more sustainably. And then again, a big one is that climate focus. So it's really looking at how can we adapt the crops that we're currently growing to ones that can still survive the effects of climate change. And now to talk a bit about sustainable agriculture, because it's quite different from climate smart agriculture in the sense that it's a lot broader, where climate smart agriculture is focused primarily on climate and reducing those greenhouse gas emissions. So sustainable agriculture encompasses a lot of different kinds of practices with ones that touch on kind of these three pillars. So it's looking to have an environmental benefit. It's looking to expand the Earth's natural resource base. And then it's also looking to preserve and improve soil fertility. It's typically defined by these three pillars or three goals, which is the environment. So how can we enhance the environment? Maybe by increasing biodiversity, maybe by using less pesticides that have um, a negative impact on human health or the environment. It's also looking to sustain economic viability. And by that, it just means how can sustainable agriculture help farmers in terms of income, how so they can make their ends meet, so they can earn money from agriculture as a livelihood. And then it's also looking at a social aspect. So sustainable agriculture is looking to improve quality of life, not just for farmers and their families, but also for those who work on farms, who live in and around the community, who go to school there, who live there, etc. And this is a diagram I found online, but I just wanted to use it to kind of highlight some of the sustainable agricultural practices. This is not all encompassing, so there's tons other sustainable agricultural practices that are currently used, but I just wanted to highlight and talk about some of them, particularly the ones that are circled in red. And so the first there is crop rotation, and it kind of is what that picture is depicting, where let's say in this year you're planting tomatoes in a field. The next year you're going to want to move where you plant your tomatoes so that it doesn't build up disease pressure in the soil or insect pressure so that the soil fertility can continue to be improved because some plants require higher amounts of maybe nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium. And so making sure you rotate the different fields ensures that soils are not being depleted. The next image there is cover cropping. And to kind of give a sense of what that is, it's kind of like a blanket for the soil. And so you're planting a crop not with the intention of harvesting that crop and selling it to a market. It's meant to basically blanket the soil. Maybe you're looking to add nitrogen back to the soil, or because you planted a crop that requires a high amount of nitrogen, so that cover crop is helping to put nitrogen back to the soil. Another key aspect of cover cropping is kind of how it's covering the soil. So in nature, you often find that, for example, in a forest, you see that when trees lose their leaves, that the forest is covered in a layer of leaves and other organic matter. And so that's kind of the same idea with cover cropping is that you're covering the soil so it doesn't lead to soil erosion when a farmer isn't planting and harvesting crops in that field. Another example of sustainable agriculture is organic farming. They often kind of have a lot of similar ideas, but with organic farming, at least in the US, it's a bit stricter in the sense that you have to be certified to be an organic farm. There's a lot of restrictions of what you can and cannot use in terms of fertilizers, seed varieties, and especially pesticides. That's one of the big kind of facets of organic farming is you can't use synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. And so farmers would have to use more natural means of applying stuff maybe through worm castings um, and other kind of natural based materials. The last image there, I won't kind of go into detail just yet because I'll be talking a bit about it later on, but it's IPM stands for Integrated Pest Management. It's a holistic approach to pest management where you kind of try to understand what a problem is, whether it's a pest or disease problem in farming, and try to look for how can we maybe manage that problem um, before so that you're not adding chemicals until it's a last resort. So maybe you're seeing like when you go into a field, That looks like on that image Japanese beetles. They eat kind of the leafy part, the green part of the plant, the leaves. And so trying to see maybe how many beetles are out there in the field and trying to understand, do we really need to go out and spray just yet, or can we wait a few weeks? So just trying to understand insect biology and behavior. This table here is kind of a breakdown that differentiates some of the aspects of climate smart and sustainable agriculture, because again, a lot of the ideas cross over. The key difference with climate smart agriculture is that it's focused on adapting to climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, whereas sustainable agriculture is a lot broader. And it's really sustainable agriculture is looking to improve farmer livelihoods, right, that are in the present day, but also for future generations. All right. So integrative pest management, this is kind of one of my favorite topics to speak on. And be doing like a case study in a couple of slides within the framework of IPM. You can kind of think of it as this decision support system and holistic approach to pest management, which emphasizes prevention of pests and their damage before and through more natural means compared to chemical means. So kind of if when you look at that pyramid there on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see chemical applications are at the top. So that's the last resort, what you would do after everything else has failed. And then you kind of start at the bottom, at the base of the pyramid, through things again like crop rotation, maybe using resistant varieties of different plants and things like that. And IPM is really focused on how can we use the pest and host biology and monitoring practices to respond to pest problems. Monitoring is basically just a farmer or a specialist just going out to the field and looking at your crop, maybe potatoes, for example, and saying, okay, are there how many Colorado potato beetles are out in the fields? Do we need to actually go and spray, or can we wait a few weeks because the population levels are low? That would just be an example of monitoring. And within that kind of pyramid that you see the green part there, IPM seeks to utilize these controls, cultural, mechanical, and biological controls. Cultural example would be crop rotation, like we saw before. Other ones are mechanical, so things maybe like yellow sticky traps, which can be used in the field next to your crop. You just put a sticky trap to see monitor insects. So that sticky trap, the insect, maybe a fly would land on the trap, so you can kind of count and see how many there are on a field at a given time. Another is biological control. That is just meaning that when we're thinking about insects, there are some that are beneficial. So things maybe like ladybugs or hoverflies that are pollinators, but maybe some of those pollinators are also predators, so they'll eat other insects. So if you have an insect on your farm with a pest, trying to increase maybe biodiversity or bringing in by purchasing a insect. There are companies that sell insects primarily for the reason so that farmers can buy them in and feed on whatever pests they might have in the field. So that would be an example of biological control. And then lastly, again, monitoring is really a key facet of integrated pest management. So just because you have a pest in the field doesn't mean that you need to go ahead and spray. It just means that you should monitor as the weeks go on during the grazing season to make sure, do you need to spray or can you wait a little bit because the pest level is pretty low. And again, that top at the pyramid, the chemical control would be kind of the action step. So you would only have to spray once that pest reaches what's called an economic threshold. So that's just the point at which the damage leaving the pest in the field would, if you don't take an action, then the farmer would maybe lose income or lose a certain amount of the crop for the season. So you would have to spray at that threshold. All right, so the last part of the presentation today is going to be talking a bit about IPM in terms of apple production in the United States in the Northeast. So this was part of some research I did as a graduate student a couple years ago. And it focused on looking at only one or two pests in particular. There's a lot of insect pests. If you've had an apple before, they're a perennial crop. They grow on trees in colder climates. And so when we're growing apples in at least our region of the United States, there's an insect pest that affects the production at every stage from when the trees are still in dormancy during the colder months all the way through harvest time in the fall. So that time frame is really about at least 6 months. So it's a long portion of the year. So growers and farmers really have to think about how they can manage all of these pests at every stage of the growing season. And so this research focused on primarily aphids. So that's that image in the middle there. In particular, that species is called the rosy apple aphid. So it has this pink color. And you can see that's just one leaf on one part of one tree. There's probably at least close to 100 aphids on that one tree alone, or one leaf alone. And so this pest is one that the population can rapidly expand as the weather warms up. In particular, it's a problem during mid-May through the end of June. After that, kind of the population kind of goes into overwintering, so it leaves the field and it's not a problem anymore. But it is kind of something that a farmer would have to deal with for at least a month and a half out of the year. And some main issues with this pest, just from that image, you can see the leaf is starting to curl up. So this pest feeds on the plant tissue there, the leaf. It excretes the sugars or takes out the sugars from the leaf. And so that can lead to the leaves curling and falling off eventually, which can stunt the plant. The insect also has a symbiotic relationship with ants. Aphids excrete this sticky substance called honeydew. And so ants really like to feed on the sugars from that substance. And then through that process, there's a fungus that can also develop on the apple skin. So then the farmer can't sell it to market because no one wants to buy a fruit that has any kind of damage on it in the US. And so it makes it really hard for farmers to sell their crops. So trying to find a way to manage this insect pest was one of the goals of this research. And that last image there on the right is kind of an example of what this project entailed. So with this test, one of the goals was to use these grafted apple trees. So you can kind of see here in the bubbles, these are the different kinds of apples that were grafted onto the tree. Grafting just means you're cutting a part of one variety of apple and putting it onto another tree or plant. It's used in all kinds of contexts in food production, vegetable production, and horticultural production for like ornamental plants, for landscaping, or for flowers and beautification processes. So um, in this case, we use grafting to try to create this attractive host for this insect called pest, the aphids. And so with this tree, the idea is that if you put maybe you don't have to put six, but if you put multiple varieties of apples onto one tree, that tree is going to be a preferred host, possibly, for the insect pests. And in addition to that, and I'll talk about this in a few slides because I think I have some more information on this then. But again, this is just the whole goal of it is, can we use this kind of IPM technique to congregate insect pest pressure and reduce pesticide use? And so to give kind of a bit of background that kind of informed this research is why apples, there's tons of other fruits and other kind of crops that we consume, but why apples? Um, so in Massachusetts, my professor was working with tree fruits, so I knew I had to pick something with tree fruits, and apples are kind of in the state of Massachusetts where I am. That's kind of one of the major crops that we grow. And so that kind of informed this research. But apples in the US are on like a nationwide scale, one of the top fruit crops that we produce, both for consuming here in the US, but also for international export. And so to kind of give you a sense of the economic value of apples, in 2024, the USDA, which is the United States Department of Agriculture, estimates that the apple production was valued at over $2.7 billion and yielded almost 4 million tons of fruit. In Massachusetts alone, that's just some figures of how much, how many acres or hectares we cultivate apples on, and we produce almost 6.4 tons back, at least in 2022. Um, and Massachusetts is not the only state that produces apples. We are actually one of the smaller states, but the way and the markets we have for growing apples are quite different. Larger states include Washington, which is out on the West Coast, and then New York State, which is kind of just west of Massachusetts. And the key idea here is that in Massachusetts, apple production is primarily for agritourism, so people maybe who are coming out of the state, who go to farms for tours. So that's a main driver or a main market area. And then you pick apples. So that just means in instances where people maybe from Massachusetts or out of state are coming to the different farms that produce apples to do pick your own. So they're coming to pick a bag of apples and then leave for their day. So that's also a significant revenue for small farms. So what that idea is, it's not, yes, it is a farm and they're producing it kind of for a commercial purpose, but also it's not for wholesale production. So these small farms are relatively smaller. People are coming to the farm, which is kind of one of the different aspects compared to commercial production where you're producing for export maybe or to sell to large grocery stores. And so these people really do care about pesticides and they always ask farmers, do you spray? And farmers have to say, yes, we do, but we use other ecological means to prevent pest damage. So we don't always just use chemicals. Yes, we have to because there's not really another option, but we try to limit the amount of chemicals we're using. And so to go back to kind of this idea of the grafted apple trees as a preferred host, this kind of technique in IPM is referred to trap cropping. So that means we're planting this tree as a preferred host near your main crop or your cash crop so that the apples or the cash crop that you're looking to sell the market or use for the pick your owns are not going to get sprayed. So you're kind of have the goal of diverting pest pressure away from it. And so that idea also built off of prior research that some cultivars of apples are more attractive to certain insect pests than others. The ones that were selected here on this image were selected from prior research that had been done, but also from the input of farmers in the area because they're ultimately the ones who are growing the apples. So if you've heard of extension services, they're kind of not just in the US, but they're extension services in a lot of different countries. And their goal is to kind of do research for farmers that kind of helps farmers in their own countries. And also to do agriculture education. So they do the research, they run the trials, they get the data, and then they communicate that to farmers. And so this research also was done through an extension program. And so this project started back in 2018 across 10 commercial apple orchards in Massachusetts with these 6 apple cultivars. And they used pyramidal row apple trees. So to kind of give you a sense of what that looked like, that image here on the screen shows what a block of apples looks like on a farm, a block just meaning an area. In yellow, you can see that's kind of the perimeter of the apple block. You can see the trees are grown in these rows up and down. The red dots represent where those grafted apple trees were put in on this area of the farm. So there were 7 total in this farm. You don't have to put 7. I've seen from the other plots or the other farms, usually there were maybe 4 at the least, and 6 at the most trees planted around the perimeter. And again, the goal is to attract whatever insect pest, not the one, just the aphids that I looked at, but there were some others that research was being conducted on at this time. And the project started with some other insect pests, but the goal really is to attract them to the perimeter because a lot of insects overwinter outside of the orchard. And so if you're putting them on the perimeter, that's where they'll land before they go into the interior part of the apple orchard. So that's kind of based the presentation I had today, just some concluding points. We can see that climate change and the stresses are expected to decrease agricultural productivity, in particular in countries in Africa, South America, and those along the equator, and including in South Asia. Sustainable agriculture is looking to meet current food needs while also preserving the planet's ability to sustain food production for future generations. Climate smart agriculture built on those same concepts from sustainable agriculture, but really is focusing in on how can we integrate the problem of climate change to tackle food production. And then lastly, we looked at IPM, so that's basically an important decision-making tool that farmers can utilize to manage maybe insect pressure or disease pressure with the lowest possible risk for both humans and the environment. So I will stop the presentation there and stop sharing, but I'm happy to take any questions at this point, or if anyone just has something that they want to share about agriculture in their region, feel free to unmute yourselves or put it in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions. To everyone here is um, what does agriculture production look like in your maybe town or city? Because I know it can differ depending on where you live, even in the same country. In the US, what we grow in where I live, it's a smaller area. And what we grow is vastly different than maybe in California, where the climate is a lot warmer and they can grow things like avocados and pistachios and nuts. So what would agriculture or what does agriculture look like for you? I'm very happy to have joined today for the presentation. If you have any other follow-up questions or anything, you can feel free to reach out to me through email. My email is smian@umass.edu. So feel free to contact me if you have any questions, and I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you, Samina.
Thank
Nice
you.
presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samina. That was really a great presentation. Thank you for sharing your research with us. It's really valuable. Thank you for your time. And I hope if they have any questions, they will definitely reach out to you.
Sounds good. Thank you,
Thank you.
Dr. Sanober, and thank you, Dr. Saad.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Talk
Thank you.
to
Wish
you.
you the same.